welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show. Gia Laudi and Claire Suellentrop from Forget the Funnel. Welcome both.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you on the SaaS Revolution Show. I think, well, first of all, it was great to meet you, Claire, for the first time after years of being aware of you, obviously through Forget the Funnel and social media following, and I think even probably trying to get you to Dublin like once or twice, but circumstances or stars not aligning.
You know what? Fingers crossed for the future.
Exactly. 2022 October. We'll put it in the calendar. But and Gia, obviously, well, welcome to the podcast. Also for the first time, we've had you speak at a few SaaStock events as well, and hopefully some more in the future. But good to have you both here. I'm excited for the conversation. Where are you both at the moment? Where are you in Canada?
I'm in Montreal in Canada. Yep.
Yes. And for many years, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, in the US. I actually relocated now, and I'm in the middle of the US in Kansas City, Missouri. Not exactly the biggest tech scene, but that's the beauty of remote work, right?
Very cool. Yeah, very true indeed. Well, good stuff. And I'm in sunny Ramsgate in the UK. It's actually not so sunny, and it feels like summer is gone and autumn is already here. Sadly. So, cheers for that. But look, tell us, maybe for those not necessarily me, but the audience that's listening, who is Gia Laudi or Laudi and Claire Suellentrop, who are you? And a little bit about you, as people, as well as, the companies that you started and, working together.
You start, Claire.
I was going to say, you want to jump in? So just, I'm happy to chat a bit about, how we began working together. Gia, if you want to give your own intro, you're also perfectly welcome. Gia and I met back in 2017 now, in a women's networking group, like a women in tech networking group. We both have backgrounds leading marketing for SaaS companies. We both joined SaaS companies at relatively early stages, and then both those companies, I was with Calendly, Gia was with Unbounce. Both have grown significantly, and we really, independently of knowing each other during those years, we were a critical part of these teams seeing rapid growth, right? And the like typical SaaS story. So we have that
typical successful SaaS story.
You're so right. Yes.
Yeah.
But we had those shared, though completely independent experiences in our backgrounds. And so when we met, we had a lot in common, a lot to discuss, and thought, it would be really cool to do some kind of collaboration, some kind of project together at some point. We have very similar philosophies about how marketing impacts a company and where it shows up within growth strategy, overall growth strategy, which probably leads into, the story of what we began doing together. Anything else you would add to like the intro, the backstory, Gia, before we go from there?
Nope, I think you nailed it.
Great.
And let's say outside of, just getting to know you both as people. So Claire, you're in Kansas. Sure. Gia, you're in Montreal. What is it outside of SaaS? Like that you're into. Any hobbies? Family people like kite surfers or something like that. Something maybe you don't know about you, perhaps that you're happy to share.
Sure, I'll go. I am a mother of two small children, 5 and 6, and they just started school this week. So I'm very much in like end of summer, start of school week. Just spent our first summer at our new lakefront property that we just bought in the spring, and it has like 4 125-year-old houses on it, and so we are renovating, like completely gutting and renovating these like tiny little cottages on the water at the lake. And so that is what I have been doing. All of my spare time is spent parenting and in renovation mode. So that is all I have bandwidth for beyond obviously working, but yeah.
Very, very, very cool. And I can resonate. My kids go back to school tomorrow, and I think the parents are extremely excited, but actually the kids seem to be more excited. And I don't remember as a child being excited for the summer holidays to end and going back to school, but my kids can't wait to get back. So I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, same, actually, similar.
It's quite nice. But anyway, what about you, Claire? Something that we don't know about you?
Something we don't know. I've lived all over the States. I grew up here in the Midwest region, and then lived out in the New York region for quite a while in my pre-SaaS years. That was my initial career stage. And Atlanta was where I really got into tech, and have been on that trajectory since then. Moving back to the middle of the US was really a move to be closer to family. So I've got my husband and I both have a ton of family throughout this region. And so the big driver was really being able to be like a more consistent part of family life. We do not have children, but we have a ton of nieces and nephews. I have siblings here, he has siblings here, my parents are here. So that's really been a big part of my life behind the scenes. And then, it's so hard to talk about hobbies because with COVID, every hobby outside of work kind of died. So, oh my goodness, what is there that is interesting? We recently moved into a home where we plan to be for many, many years. So somewhat along the lines of, Gia, you buying these cottages and renovating them. We're not necessarily renovating a home so much as we are like getting used to being in one place after years of moving very, very frequently. So it's been a nice kind of like slow down. Work has not slowed down, but personal life has slowed down a bit, which is fine.
Good to hear. Thanks for sharing that. So, as you said, like earlier, that you came together, finding each other via this kind of online women in tech group, and therefore, showing a great example there of these, online groups and communities, and the value of that. And I know we both, online communities. But why, I guess, did you start Forget the Funnel? And how do you help SaaS companies, and some examples of maybe, I don't know if your clients are happy to kind of share, some of the companies that you work with and how you help them.
Sure, I'll jump in on that. So the sort of origin of Forget the Funnel was, as Claire mentioned, we had very much a shared sort of, we'd shared philosophies when it comes to marketing and growth. We also had a similar experience when we both left our in-house roles and began consulting with SaaS companies. Again, this is back in early 2017, where we would have founders come to us wanting marketing and having very little understanding of, what needs to go into it, expectations kind of out of whack, really expecting that marketing was something that should be added sort of after the fact, as opposed to being involved in the process of, product development and thinking about product growth. And so we were both seeing a lot of the same things when having these client conversations. A big lack of expertise in the space as well. I always kind of joke that I have the advantage when talking to people about what I do that don't know what SaaS is. I say I have this advantage of being quite senior in an industry that is quite young. And the sort of the number of people, like just sheer numbers wise, that can say that they've been working with SaaS companies for 10 years or 15 years is very slim. And when founders go out and finally decide, okay, it's time to add marketing to this thing, they get a very rude awakening when they realize what level of experience and what level of skill and strategy a manager level marketer can provide versus, and what that type of person costs versus somebody like a CMO or that has that extra strategic level and a lot more experience. So that was sort of this realization of like, wow, all of our clients seem to be doing this. Plus, on the flip side of that coin, we knew very well what it was like to be that marketer with a founder with sort of out of whack expectations. not because we necessarily were in those situations ourselves, but our peers were, and we, of course, experienced to some extent a misunderstanding or sometimes a misalignment of sort of not hierarchy, but prioritization within a SaaS business where everything seems to be about product, everything seems to be about tech, and the often lowest paid, sometimes, undervalued, typically overworked type customer facing type of roles in, customer success and marketing. So we were aware of both of these things happening simultaneously. In-house folks feeling like, wow, I'm really struggling to get mentorship internally because nobody within this company really, understands marketing, or they have unfair expectations of what marketing should be capable of. I'm overworked, I'm really stressed out. There's a lot of expectations on my shoulders to really find and sort of scale rapidly. And that can lead to burnout. And obviously there's we could do a whole podcast just on that topic alone. So we launched Forget the Funnel first, just in this, we need to try to bridge the gap here. And we want to help these folks out as much as possible to sort of let them know that they know more than they think they know. They can gain, they can gain a bigger seat at the table, so to speak, and gain the sort of that level within a company if they, think about things slightly differently or whatever. So when we started Forget the Funnel, a lot of our content was focused on, how to gain buy-in from your CEO, and how to build a strategy, and, what is the difference between a strategy and marketing tactics, and let's actually talk in real terms. What, paid marketing, how paid marketing, for just a tiny example, isn't the solution to all of your marketing, challenges, and how tactics need to be thought of as tactics, and strategies really need to be sort of designed. And so a lot of our content was focused on that and helping those in-house folks. Simultaneously, on the other side, of course, we were continuing to work with clients and with founders. And so we've sort of always sort of played the balance between the two and addressed those two markets. More recently, what we've been working on is actually helping consultants and service providers of those SaaS companies. So we've been trying to, through this framework that we've developed, and the framework that we use when we work with clients and that we teach to in-house folks, we're now helping other consultants to do the same thing with the clients that they work with. Wow, that was just like a big run on. I don't even know that I 100% answered your question.
No, it did, but I'm still curious, and maybe for the listeners, in terms of Forget the Funnel, who should be a part of it? Is it's marketers, I don't know, growth folks, etc.
Strategists.
Strategists.
Yeah. Anybody responsible for, historically, who we've been focused on addressing is anybody who has been tasked with or is responsible for growing a SaaS business, whether or not your title is head of growth, head of marketing, CMO, founder, or even somebody hired, maybe on a contract basis with those companies. So anybody thinking about growing a SaaS business.
And they're coming in and they're connecting with each other or learning by through content. Is it a community? Is it what is it, sort of program?
So probably similar to SaaStock. Our Forget the Funnel has evolved over the past few years, and please, Claire, jump in whenever I use them out. So originally we started out, again, focused on those in-house folks and our sort of consultancy, a little bit behind the scenes, working with founders and directly with teams. And we've been doing that for a number of years. In that process, though, and through our individual backgrounds, Claire and I, and this is the framework that I was just talking about a second ago, Claire and I have very similar backgrounds, but also very different backgrounds and expertise. Claire has deep expertise in customer research and in gathering customer insight and this critical customer insight. I, on the other hand, have more of a background on the operationalizing side, strategy building. And so we sort of married those two things. And when we started to talk to in-house folks about, how to address their growth needs, and certainly when we were working with founders, and when we do also continue to work with founders on their growth and scaling, we use this framework called customer-led growth, which is the marriage of those two things. It's, building scalable sort of revenue generating outcomes for businesses based on these critical customer insights. And so that's customer-led growth. And we, using that framework, we work with clients and the SaaS companies that we work with. We teach that framework to the in-house folks. And now, like I just said before, we're also helping other consultants to use that same framework when working with SaaS companies.
Awesome. So I want to talk a bit about this framework, or learn a little bit without you know, giving away the secret sauce, or like, I don't know, like, you know, but
pretty well open books. Yeah. It's all good.
And so yes, I want to learn a little bit more about that. And I also want to talk about, like, you know, if you're an early stage kind of a startup founder, or even, you know, marketer, and then moving away, you know, from these kind of like piecemeal sort of tactics and these ad hoc experiments to more sustainable growth. And I think obviously the two probably or should like marry up pretty well, right? That's probably why you created the framework. So happy to talk about that, give away some secrets, but not necessarily everything, but you know, hopefully make some, you know, good learning and listening for the listeners.
Claire, jump in.
Whew, I was going to say, where do we start? Okay. It might help to paint the picture of what companies typically have been doing to grow when they reach the point at which they realize that's no longer sustainable. Oftentimes when a potential client comes to us, or a founder or a head of marketing or whoever it may be comes to forget the funnel, what has typically happened is growth has been a series of very piecemeal efforts. So maybe that, I mean, and that can show up in so many different ways. It might be that they've developed an addiction to paid, for example. I know you touched on paid just a moment ago. That's very common. It might be that, you know, again, I'm going to reference different things that you've observed, or you've mentioned that we've observed, Gia. It might be that the person who was hired to lead marketing doesn't really have a core foundation to work from in choosing what tactics to employ. And so they're like kind of flying by the seat of their pants. And like, well, we could do this, or we could try this. And everything feels very ad hoc. And there's no real system for setting growth goals, choosing the tactics, or developing a strategy and choosing tactics. It's all typically leading up to the point at which companies or individuals find us. Growth has kind of been a game of like throwing darts. So in working with companies, what we have, like the framework we've really developed, I'll name probably like the high level steps, and then you can, you know, tell me where it's useful to dig in. I'm going to describe it the way that we really do it with companies, and how it's kind of turned into a series of steps. So the first step is always getting very, very clear on right now what the critical business opportunity really is. You know, there's so many different ways you can grow revenue depending on where within the customer's experience you choose to focus. So that involves a bit of math and usually a bit of a come to Jesus meeting with the executive team, where we really get clear on whether it's the best use of their resources right now to be thinking about acquisition, or is it really more of an activation and retaining more you know, free or paid customers who are coming in? Or is it something else entirely? Is it thinking about expansion opportunities for their current customer base? So getting clear on where they think the biggest opportunity for growth is always where we start. So that's step one. And then step two is actually gathering insights from the what we tend to define as like the ideal customer for whom we think we should prioritize in that opportunity. Again, whether that is acquiring new customers, whether it's better activating existing free users, or you know, newly paying customers, so on, that kind of shifts the direction of what customers or target market audience members we learn from. And we leverage the jobs to be done framework in our research to really get to the heart of what pushes people to wake up one day and say, you know what, today's the day I'm going to buy X. That's typically the missing insight that teams need in order to know which different strategy, and then which different tactics to really employ. So we start with gaining that insight, and then we go to, Gia, as you mentioned, building out systems and strategic documents, customer experience mapping, and so on, to really operationalize that and identify, the correct milestones that real customers actually go through in their experience with this company, with this product. Oftentimes this involves, actually every time, this involves assessing whether the company has even been tracking the right KPIs to evaluate whether they're on track with their growth goals, or whether their growth goals and what their customers' needs are aligned or out of whack. So identifying the problem or the critical opportunity, gathering the right insight from the right segment of customers, building out strategic documents to operationalize that learning, and then putting together the actual strategy and set of tactics for growth is like the process at the highest level. Now, obviously, there's tons we could dig into, but I'll take a step back because now I'm the one who's kind of gone on a bit of a tangent.
Not a tangent at all. And I just, I guess, a couple of points on there. I mean, on the critical kind of business opportunity, so you talked about, I guess, in terms of where the customers are coming from, or where you would necessarily kind of like focus, but would you also be looking at here if a company has maybe more than kind of like one product, saying, well, look, you're spending a lot of resource on these products, but in terms of from the revenue or the return on these products, yes, we think more resources should be put here, and you're kind of getting involved at that stage as well.
That's such a good example and very timely. We're actually working with a company right now that has had great success with their core product, and they recently acquired another product, and they're kind of deciding whether they need to merge that product and the overall company positioning into something new, or whether their challenge is, do we try to merge these two things and sell and reposition ourselves as this all-in-one solution? Or is our better move to sell our core product and then leverage this recently acquired product as like an expansion opportunity? And that's almost exactly what you just described. So our objective as their consultants and advisors is to figure that out for them, is to understand, are the reasons people hire these two different products similar enough that they could be packaged together, or does this need to be more of like a land and expand or an upsell opportunity? So I'm so glad you brought up that type of growth opportunity, because those more mature companies struggle with things like this just as much as the earlier stage, looking to scale and so on type of company.
There's a few scenarios there as well. It might be a company that so far has relied on a sales-led approach and is really interested in leveraging a product-led approach, and they don't know how to go about that. There's scenarios where there has been good and solid momentum for a few years, but because of recent events or because of product change, they've experienced slowed or inconsistent growth, or maybe something more along the lines of, okay, we've seen really good traction with the tactics that we've used so far, but now we really need to scale. We've just, maybe they just received some funding, or maybe they're going after some funding and they need a plan for scale, for revenue scaling. There's a few different scenarios where this framework can be really, really helpful. But it's honestly, it's been so fun to do this type of work. It's just the most gratifying work ever. And also, we tend to meet companies at this point where they're like, there must be a change here. Like we have to address this, and we know that there's a bigger opportunity. We just don't either have the time, bandwidth, internal skill set inside the team to sort of take advantage. And so they come to us knowing that they need to make this shift. And it's been, super, super gratifying to work with them. It's awesome. And also use this framework and dig into the customer insights, and the answer is sort of laid out for us. So it's been really, really great so far.
And hopefully it's not a stupid question, but with you've got sales-led growth, product-led growth. We're talking about customer-led growth.
Yep.
Is customer-led growth complementary to your sales-led growth or your product-led growth motions, or is it an also?
Not a stupid question at all.
Yeah, no, not a stupid question at all. What we would say to that is it comes first. So you can decide and make a much more informed decision about which of those growth strategies you should leverage and at what points you should leverage them when you're customer-led first. So when you figure out what is the most appropriate experience for this customer. So Claire was just talking about like, what is that day that they wake up and they're like, today is the day I solved this problem. What does that day look like? What does the next day look like? What does the, evaluation of options look like? What are they comparing you to? Are you more likely up against direct competitors, alternative solutions, a spreadsheet? Those types of decisions are, and that type of insight into your customers is critical to understanding whether or not you should even take a sales-led or product-led approach, let alone, what might be going on inside of that company. If it's a B2B, who makes the decision, who feels the pain most acutely, who's most likely to go out and seek that solution, what would be their favorite way to evaluate a product, what would they need to see, and in what order when they start to evaluate that product. All the answers to that become very clear when you're customer-led first and foremost, and then you can understand, then you can make the decision about, here is where we're going to leverage our product, here is where we're going to leverage some humans and maybe a sales-led approach. We need a higher touch potentially. Here's where we should introduce marketing again potentially, right? When we're talking about post-acquisition and things like that. So it gives customer-led growth is sort of, the idea is that it comes first above everything else. Yeah, Claire, jump in.
As you were speaking, Gia, a pretty tangible example came to mind that might be useful. So there was a company we worked with earlier this year, they're a very successful, very mature agency, and they had built an internal SaaS software product and wanted to experiment or explore, does this have legs? Can this be something that we package and sell,
market with? Yeah.
Really, very common scenario. Internally built solutions that you then realize, opportunity here. And the decision makers we were working with had, very, very kind of MVP style, gotten a couple of agency clients onto this product, and they were using it successfully. It was going really well. But that go-to-market piece, that what do we do with this thing to make it attractive piece was a big question mark for them. And so in our research, we interviewed different types of decision makers who were involved in the buying process. And what we realized, not a rare situation, was that there was an end user who really feels the pain and typically seeks out a solution like this. And then there's the executive decision maker they need to get buy-in from, right? So it's oftentimes some type of marketing leader who's like, this sucks, I need a solution. And then there's, a CFO or a CEO, they need to prove the business case to. Now, our client had it in mind that the way to go about this was really going to was going to be speaking to that decision maker. And in our research, we realized that level of decision maker within this buying process doesn't really care about the solution. So we'll have to employ a completely different, much more sales-led, honestly, strategy if that's who you want to target. If you want to target the person whose hair is on fire, if you want to target the person who really understands the problem, we're going to need to employ more of a product-led approach, because that person is going to want to do the exploring themselves. They're not going to want to talk to a salesperson. They don't want to get on a demo. And so the customer-led piece really does help the company decide, based on who you want to target, which of those product sales, et cetera, led strategies is the right choice.
And I just want to jump back to when you were talking through the framework. You talked about a job to be done, which is part of it, and then I gave a little bit of an explanation for that. But from my knowledge, I know that, let's say, and I'll probably do this massive injustice here, but I think like Bob Moesta is involved in or created the jobs to be done framework, and I think there is a video, or there's something like Clayton Christensen talks about the milkshake, and the job to be done is to feel the hunger, and that's why the person is buying the milkshake. So you about why does that person, your customer, wake up that morning and decides to buy your product? So do you recommend, my long-winded question was showing some knowledge or very little knowledge of what this framework is, and that's it. So I hope we don't have like, a whole evening.
That was great.
But do you recommend all SaaS companies should be looking at, something like jobs to be done to, further help them really kind of understand, what's happening, why are people buying, and if they did, that they would see some, I don't know, incremental kind of, results or improvements?
I am admittedly biased, but my answer is definitely yes. It's truthfully, whether we name it jobs to be done or whatever title it gets, at the core, it's really just about understanding the psychology that pushes your ideal customer to seek out a solution and evaluate purchase options. Like, it's very common sense. The jobs to be done language and kind of conventions, in my experience, just makes it easier to really do, I guess, I have no idea if that makes any sense. It just makes it a bit more actionable.
100%. And that was actually where I fell in love with the framework and the work that you would do when you would come back with all this customer insight. And I immediately be like, okay, here's the whole plan. Here's the whole strategy right here. Now we need to turn it into something that teams can use and measure and build strategies around and feel like they can run really like meaningful experiments with and feel really good and confident in, and measure successfully over time and scale. Right. You can make hiring decisions based on this type of thing. You can, run obviously marketing experiments. You can expansion opportunities tend to sort of fall into your lap when you do this type of work as well. And by the way, the most obvious that I almost don't even want to mention is onboarding and product activation and product engagement, and really meaningfully measuring product activation and product engagement. Like that goes without saying. I would say, 90% of the time when we're working with companies, we identify massive success gaps in customers' ability to reach moments of value with the product, and through this type of work. And so being able to operationalize it in a way that teams can run with is sort of like where this thing takes off.
And how does one get this data from the customer? Are we talking actual phone calls, to the customer, or is this surveys? This is not like from an NPS that you're sending out kind of quarterly to get this information. Do you need to put in real calls and speak to the customer to get this information? How do you see that works when you're looking to kind of get this data?
I'd say the mix of the tactics used is going to be different based on the company and what their situation is. If the situation is expansion into a new market, then we're talking about employing audience research tactics or customer discovery tactics, which can be pretty different from, hey, we've identified this really high value existing type of customer. Now, what are some expansion opportunities?
Another thing too is what the company themselves can actually do. For instance, some companies might want to invest in running really in-depth interviews and taking the time to really dig deep, versus some other companies, which is probably more likely the case for listeners of this podcast, which is I need to get enough information that I can develop a really strong hypothesis about what needs to be done. And in those cases, surveys can go a really long way to developing a solid hypothesis. Obviously, interviews, like I don't think anybody would argue with the fact that interviews are the best case scenario, and you should always run at least a handful of those, but you can get away with quite a bit less than you might initially think when you see the word customer research, right? It's kind of a scary term. It has, connected connotations of taking months and, being really, potentially high level, but it doesn't have to be. You can be quite iterative about it, and you can be quite sort of MVP. I don't want to say MVP, but the process that we use actually only takes a couple of weeks. Right. And can result in really powerful results, like in a very, very short amount of time. Results being, I feel I have a really solid hypothesis about what we need to do next, and now let's go out and validate it.
Yeah. What I would say is key there is whichever method is being used, it is so important that the questions be framed correctly.
Yes.
The wrong, Alex, you just mentioned an NPS survey, for example, not the most useful tool to gather the insights that we need in this scenario. I'm working with an organization right now, and they are in quite a rush to get some insights within a short series of weeks. And the biggest, I'd say that the biggest value add for them right now, having me on board as their advisor, is being able to steer what questions go out to the segment we're trying to target, because it's very common for a survey to be an opportunity for every team to throw a couple of questions in that they want to learn. And that is a recipe for a useless effort. So
it can go off the rails pretty easily.
Yeah. So it can be done with things that are a little lighter lift than a series of interviews. But making sure that the right questions are asked is like, I can't overstate how important that is.
I can't have you leave the podcast without asking. You mentioned that obviously you work for Calendly, and they've done incredible things. We had Taupe come to SaaStock in, I think it was 2017, I want to say, and they were 8 million in revenue. I was actually sitting next to him in the speaker dinner, having a conversation, learning about his kind of life story, and great guy. And then a couple of years later, they're at 3.5 billion valuation. I guess, like, what stage were you at with Calendly? Was it the 0 to 10 kind of journey? And
it was.
The second part, which is great for the podcast. What was it from the marketing side of things that they were doing right, back then, way back then? This was like 2017. That could be, a couple of things that perhaps you could share, with the audience.
Sure. So I'll keep it brief because I know we're kind of at time. First and foremost, what I can say is I think everyone in SaaS would agree with this. When it's inherently a quality product, everything is easier, right? And so one thing that the company did very, very right, even before I came on board, was be extremely thoughtful about the user experience around the product. There was a lot of thought given to, this is actually this is kind of where my journey with the company began. I came on board when it was in open beta, and so it was completely free. I myself had been a beta user, and the first step of my journey with the company was transitioning it into a freemium product. The team was incredibly thoughtful about feature gating and what features are appropriate to gate versus what is going to prevent a free user from getting enough value to convert to paid. So having a fantastic product, really helpful. From a marketing perspective, that really changed the game for me and has led to the philosophy that Gia and I share, which is I came on board with the assumption that I would be responsible for what most marketing leaders are responsible for in those really early days, the zero revenue, zero in ARR days, which is demand gen. And Calendly didn't have a demand gen problem because of the nature of the product. It does its own marketing and viral loops, blah, blah, blah. So what ended up happening was that my focus needed to shift from thinking about acquiring users to activating and retaining users. And that is where jobs to be done really came into my universe. We had a very healthy stream of free users coming into the product and very little insight on what people needed out of it to get enough value to stay and ultimately convert to paid. And so that was a major shift for me in realizing that, okay, acquisition is no longer the problem and no longer how I need to think about contributing to the growth of this product and this company. I need to be thinking about when someone hires the product, the free product, what do they need to really get value from it, and how do we do that as quickly as possible? And then what customer experiences do they need? What information or education do they need to get up from free to being prepared to pay? So that is where I began learning about the jobs to be done theory. I was doing a ton of this research it's a very broad product, right? So there were many, many different jobs people were hiring it to do. And that to me, looking back, that was how we were able to go from just very, very broadly marketing this product as a scheduling tool to positioning it as a solution to specific struggles our different segments had. And yes, to answer your question from a moment ago, I was coming in as literally the second hire. So it was Taupe and myself, and then the product team. And when I left, we were in the early millions ARR. I can't quite remember the number now, but it was end of 2016. So shortly before, you mentioned meeting in 2017.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that story. And I'm conscious that we are a little bit over time, and you may have some more Zoom calls to jump on.
Likewise.
Very quickly, sort of quick fire. I just recommended book, whether it's marketing or growth from each of you. For our listeners. Gia, maybe start with you. Is there one?
My easy one. Well, April Dunford's obviously awesome is top of my list for recommendations. I really wish I need a longer list of those for some reason. She's just my easy one. I don't know, Claire, do you have a one off the top of your head?
You stole it. April is fantastic.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm going to check my Audible right now.
Less of a book and more of just a presence in this space is Caitlin Burgoyne. Her foundations the growth methods she teaches are also focused on gaining customer insight, gaining audience insight. So we share some commonalities there. And
Louis
she is
too. Oh, sorry.
Yes, I was just going to say she's a master at she's a master at very actionable advice or tips. So she's great to follow on Twitter as an example. But yes, Louis, please, as well.
Louis Grenier, Everyone Hates Marketing. And also I recently read Bob Amuesta's most recent book, Demand Side Sales, which was fantastic as well.
Oh, good.
I definitely recommend that one. Yeah.
We'll have to check it out. Some great tips there. Good stuff. And finally, where can people find you online? How they find Forget the Funnel, and both of you?
Twitter is a gimme. Forgetthefunnel.com is the website.
Nailed it.
Good stuff. Well, look, thanks so much for being on the show. Fantastic to speak to you both, to meet for the first time, Claire. Hopefully see you both in Dublin next year in October, but speak before then. But thanks so much, Gia Laudi and Claire Suellentrop from Forget the Funnel. It's been a pleasure having you on the SaaS Revolution Show.
Thank you for having us.